So in this video, we're going to be talking about how do we solve linear and quadratic equations. Okay, so let's first talk about linear equations. So what a linear equation is, it just basically means there are no exponents here. So here I am trying to solve for p, and that's the variable that I need to find. I need to basically find what value of p makes this true, and you did this in the beginning of Algebra 1. And basically the way that you can solve this is by using inverse operations. So first you want to isolate your p's, and you do want to make sure everything's simplified. So here on this side we see that this is not simplified. So we're going to put together our p's on that side first. And so you have 8p minus 8. And then you want to isolate your p's to one side. So either you can subtract p and bring it over here, or subtract 8p and bring it on the other side. It doesn't really matter. So I'm going to subtract p and bring it over to this side. And so now I have 7p minus 8. And then I'm going to subtract my constant here and bring it over on this side. And we have -1 plus 8, which is 7. And then the last thing you want to do is divide to get rid of the multiplication, and your answer is 1. So notice we are undoing everything. We're simplifying and then undoing everything that's happening to p in order to isolate it and find what its value is. Of course, you can always plug it in and make sure that it works. Okay, so now another type of equation that you're going to see in this class is going to be a quadratic equation. And so basically what that is, it just means that there is some sort of exponent here on the variable, and there is also just one that doesn't, a variable that doesn't have an exponent on it. So the way that we're going to solve this in this class, and we're going to master this, is by factoring. So that was one of the ways that we did it last year in Algebra 1. Now, if you remember, factoring only works when you have a 0 on one side. So we need to move everything over so that we can set this equation equal to 0. And so the easiest way to do this is to move over the -3a plus 3. So we're going to add 3a to move that over to the other side, and we're going to add it to the 3a here. And we're going to add 3 to move it from here and move it on the other side and add it to the 6. So now what I have is -15a squared plus 6a plus 9 equals 0. Before we factor, we want to make our numbers super small as possible if you can. And also, you never want your first, you don't want the coefficient in front of the a squared to be negative. So the first thing we're looking is for a greatest common factor here. So we have 15, 6, and 9, and the number that goes into both of these, into all three of these numbers, is 3. So we're going to divide this by 3, and also we're going to divide this by -3 in order to get rid of that -15 that's in front of that a squared. So when I do this, -15 divided by -3 is positive 5a squared. 6a divided by -3 is -2a. And 9 divided by -3 is going to be -3. Alright, so now that we have simplified all of this, and we're ready to start. Now, notice that whenever you divide anything, 0 by anything, you still get 0, so that didn't change the 0. Now we're going to factor this, because factoring is going to allow us to basically separate the a and get rid of that a squared. So we're going to factor this into two binomials by doing reverse FOIL. Okay, basically what reverse FOIL does, so if you remember, this first, outer, inner, and last. So if you remember, these first two numbers have to multiply to give you the first term in the trinomial. So we're going to think to ourselves, what number can multiply to be 5a squared? Well, there's only really one combination. 5a, and a. Now we're going to skip the outer and the inner because if you remember, the outer and the inner add up to be that negative 2a. So we're going to skip that for a second. Now, the last, if you remember, these last two numbers need to multiply to give you the last term in your trinomial. So, for 3, you can either have 1 times 3 or 3 times 1. So, let's try 1 times 3. And this is the incorrect answer, and I'm going to show you why. Because your outer would be 1a, your inner would be 1a, and your outer would be 15a. If I add these two together, you get 16, which is not negative 2a. If I subtract these two, you get 14. So that is not what I need. So I'm going to go back, and I'm sorry, I'm making you erase in your notes. What you actually need is 3 times 1, because this would mean that your inner is 3 times a, which is 3a, and your outer is 5 times a, which is 5a. So remember that the outer and the inner combine to give you the middle term. So I'm thinking to myself, what signs would I need so that when they combine, they become a negative 2a? Well, I know I need them to subtract, so that means that they need to be different signs. And I know that my answer needs to be negative at the end. So that means that the bigger number needs to be negative and the smaller number needs to be positive. Now let's make sure if I put these two things together, so positive 3a and a negative 5a, am I going to get negative 2? Yes. And so we're going to come back here to what we call the smiley face. If you follow, what did you multiply to get negative 5a? Well, I multiplied the 1, so I'm going to put a negative on here. What did I multiply here to get a 3? I multiplied this 3 right here, so I need to put a positive on the 3. And then now I always say check that the sign of your last works. So positive 3 times negative 1, is that negative 3? Yes, so I have factored this correctly. So after you have factored this, well, basically what factoring does, if y'all remember from last year, is we found out that these make two lines and basically they're going to cross on the zeros of this quadratic. So that means that 5a plus 3 equals 0, and whatever the answer is to that, that is one of your answers here, and then a minus 1 equals 0, and whatever the answer is to that, that is your second 0. So let's solve the first one, and you can do this by doing negative inverse operations, so negative 3, and then dividing by 5. So yes, it is a fraction, and you can just leave it like that, so negative 3/5. That is one answer. And then the other answer here, the inverse operation here, would be to add 1. And so you're going to have a equals 1. Alright, so that is how you would solve a quadratic. You would solve by factoring and then setting your factors equal to 0. So a lot of people do the factoring and then forget, well guys, what are we solving for? We're solving for a. So now you have to use the factors and solve them. Okay, and that is the end of this video, and I hope that you found this useful.